Hey guys, tonight we begin with the unfortunate life of a medieval thief, a job that promised quick coin and exciting night runs, and usually delivered something else. It was dirty, dangerous, and usually over by the time you turned 23, if you were lucky. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So, you've woken up in medieval Europe, you're broke, you're hungry, and your only marketable skill is owning a functioning pair of legs. Congratulations, you're now a solid candidate for life as a petty thief. But let's be clear, nobody wanted to be a thief. It wasn't a rebellious lifestyle choice. No one in the 14th century leaned on a pitchfork and said, "When I grow up, I want to steal pies and dodge pitchforks." This wasn't Ocean's 11. This was desperation. Volume 3, with extra mud. The economy was not in your favour. Wages were laughable, assuming you were lucky enough to have a job at all. Most peasants lived hand to mouth, except the mouth was cracked and missing teeth, and the hand was probably frostbitten. If the harvest failed, or your lord decided taxes should now include your last chicken and half your dignity, you either begged, or started borrowing things that didn't belong to you, permanently. Now, you could try honest work. Sure. But here's the problem. Honest work in medieval times usually involved back-breaking labour for 14 hours a day, followed by a supper of barley paste and judgment. And even then, your employer might pay you with a potato, a handshake, or the promise of good exposure if you worked hard enough. Meanwhile, the baker's coin purse looked awfully full, and unattended. So yes, people stole, not because they were criminal masterminds, but because it was often a choice between theft and slow, ornamental starvation. But the thing is, it didn't take much to become a criminal. Steal a loaf of bread? That's theft. Pick up an apple that fell off a cart? Theft. Chase a runaway chicken and accidentally enter someone else's garden? Guess what? You're now trespassing and probably guilty of poultry conspiracy. And once you dipped a toe into that muddy legal pond, you were marked. You were now that kind of person. And in a time when gossip moved faster than carts and memory was long, especially for drama, it stuck. So, let's say you've committed to the life of theft. You're limber. You're motivated. You've tied a rag around your face to look mysterious. Great. Time to find a target. Except, good luck with that. You see, the biggest problem with being a medieval thief, other than the constant risk of hanging, is that nobody had anything worth stealing. Most villagers were poor, not can't afford new shoes poor, more like this potato is both dinner and pillow poor. The average peasant owned maybe one pair of trousers, 2 spoons, and a goat named after a family member. Their homes were made of mud, sticks, and optimism. They didn't have jewellery. They didn't have coin purses. Some of them didn't even have purses. They just tied things into bits of cloth and hoped for the best. You might get excited seeing someone in the market with a bulging pouch, only to find it's full of turnip seeds and a dead mouse. Congratulations. You've just risked your life for ingredients and rodent protein. You'd think nobles were better targets. They had gold, after all. But they also had guards, dogs, fortresses, and an unhealthy enthusiasm for punishing people who touched their hats the wrong way. Robbing a noble was like walking into a wasp nest with a torch and hoping the wasps were polite. Then there were the clergy. Churches had chalices and silver crosses, yes, but also locked doors, divine judgment, and more importantly, town gossip. Steal from the church, and everyone knew by lunch. Also, you might get cursed. Even if you didn't believe in curses, it still ruined your week. And don't even think about grave robbing. First of all, medieval cemeteries weren't exactly Fort Knox. They were barely organised. You could spend half the night digging only to find a pile of rocks and a very annoyed mole. Plus, exhuming bodies meant people assumed you were into dark magic, which came with additional problems. Being a thief in medieval Europe required a certain level of stealth, moving quietly through the shadows, slipping past sleeping guards, vanishing into the mist like a mysterious, misunderstood anti-hero. That was the dream. The reality? You smelled like a bag of boiled onions left in a goat's sock. Hygiene wasn't exactly a medieval priority. Baths were rare, soap was expensive, and deodorant hadn't been invented yet, unless you counted stuffing your shirt with dried herbs and hoping people mistook you for a mobile salad. And thieves? They weren't exactly living in comfort. Most slept in haystacks, alleys, or under pigs. You absorbed the environment, not in a poetic way, in a your body is now 30% barnyard way. So when you crept up behind someone in the marketplace, they usually heard you coming. Not by sound, by scent. You might as well have worn a sign that said, "I have not seen clean water since Lent." Your clothing didn't help. Most thieves wore the same outfit every day because it was the only one they owned. After a few nights of hiding in chimneys or crouching behind fish stalls, that outfit developed a personality. The kind of personality that clears a room. Even worse. Your job required physical activity. Running, jumping, crouching, all in heavy woolen clothes that trapped every molecule of body odour like a cursed sponge. You were a walking scent crime. Guards didn't need dogs to track you. They just followed the faint trail of sweat, mould, and bad life choices. Did you hear that? No, but I smelled it. Not exactly the mystique most thieves hoped for. And if you thought you could blend into a crowd to escape, think again. Medieval crowds were full of people who also hadn't bathed. Yes, but you. You were worse. Somehow. You stood out. You were the human equivalent of a warning. It's hard to be invisible when everyone around you is quietly gagging and opening windows. Dogs. Man's best friend. Unless, of course, you were a medieval thief. In which case, dogs were traitorous furry snitches with teeth. Every village, farmstead and roadside tavern had one. Not the floppy-eared, tail-wagging, who's a good boy kind we know today. No. These were wiry, half-feral creatures with scars, names like Chopper or Bitey, and the temper of a drunk blacksmith with gout. You didn't pet them. You prayed they didn't detect your presence through the fog. To a thief, dogs were the worst kind of security system. Cheap, loyal, and prone to dramatic barking at everything. It didn't matter how quiet you were. Step on a twig? Bark. Sneeze into your sleeve? Bark. Breathe slightly near the pantry door? You'd better believe bark. And now the entire street knows you're trying to liberate that wheel of cheese. And they weren't just noisy. They were fast. Dogs could cross muddy courtyards in seconds. Meanwhile, you're slipping on cabbage leaves and tripping over buckets. Suddenly, the quick job turns into a frantic race between your questionable cardio and a set of yellowed fangs. Getting bitten wasn't even the worst part. The real issue? Once a dog hated you, and they always did. It never forgot. Medieval dogs had memories like grudge-holding grandparents. You could rob a bakery once in spring, and 3 months later, that same dog would be waiting for you outside the alehouse, ready for round 2. Even worse, the townspeople loved their dogs more than their relatives. If a guard dog barked at you, people didn't ask questions. Oh, Bitey's barking. Must be a thief. Grab a pitchfork and tell the priest to prep the confession chair. You couldn't bribe them, reason with them, or outrun them forever. They didn't care if you were just trying to swipe a loaf of bread for your starving sibling. As far as they were concerned, you were an intruder, and your legs were made of chew toys. Here's the ironic thing. Most medieval homes didn't have locks. Not because people were trusting, but because locks were expensive, complex, and usually reserved for things like monasteries, city gates, or chests that definitely contained 3 rusty spoons and a saint's toenail. So you might think, perfect, easy pickings for me, the nimble village sneak thief. Not quite. Because while locks were rare, traps were not. People couldn't afford keys, so they got creative. And by creative, I mean